and welcome back to Migration Season 2, Episode 8. Today, we are talking about a subject that far too often carries more weight for humanity than any event we'll face. The prospect of our eventual death both fascinates and terrifies us. I know that the notion that I'm eventually going to experience dying used to be a subject of such dread. I didn't know how to possibly confront it because it seemed like there was really no way to make peace with it. I knew it was inevitable, so what's the point even thinking about it? There's nothing I could do about it, so I just kind of disregarded it, swept it under the rug, and I even joked about it. Eventually, I learned that it wasn't as much about the fact that death was going to occur, it was more about my assumptions about what I was and what it meant for that concept of me to die in the first place. If I had to narrow down the most important lasting effect from my experiences with lucid dreaming and out-of-body experiences, it would be that I am now truly not afraid of death any longer. It wasn't until that realization set in for me that I was able to comprehend what an incredibly unbalanced power that fear wielded over my life. So we're going to explore what death really means from this perspective of non-localized consciousness that we've been covering in this series. And that doesn't mean that I can tell you exactly what you're personally going to experience when you die. I can't even tell you exactly what's going to happen when I die. I've learned that even those exact details aren't important. What is important is the ultimate nature of who we really are at our core. So strap in, smoke 'em if you got 'em, and get ready for today's episode of Migration. So let's start by trying to take this idea of death and put it into a slightly different context. So I want you to follow me on this. For many of us, we carry a certain nostalgia for our childhood. Even those of us who didn't have the happiest of upbringings, it's likely that you carry some vague intuition that you lost a sense of wonder as you've aged, that there was some indescribable magic of being young. Now, if you're really pressed to say exactly what that magic was that you lost, you might say, well, when I was a kid, I didn't really have a lot of responsibilities. I didn't have to really worry about too much, and I didn't know anything about the world yet, so maybe it's true that ignorance is bliss. Now, that all might be true, but what I want to draw your attention to is that when we were young, we carried this sense that anything seemed possible. For better or for worse, we didn't really know what was going to happen next. To build a real framework of the world we live in, that is, the context created from our internal narratives, takes time. When we're young, we didn't have a real internal model yet about how things work, which meant we tended to spend less of our attention in our heads and more on reality, which is unfolding in the only time it ever can unfold, in the moment. But we generally choose safety over magic. We eventually realize that being in the moment might not keep us 100% safe. So we start building a wall between us and the moment. Now, if we remember our lessons from quantum mechanics and how the dynamics of the placebo effect work on us, as we've discussed on this show, you know that truly your consciousness, along with your internal stories and beliefs, can literally direct the way reality unfolds for you moment by moment. So when we say that magic lives in the present moment, we aren't being entirely metaphorical. That context of the world that we maintain through our internal dialogue acts as a kind of barrier between our raw consciousness and the present moment. It keeps us focused on abstractions about what will happen and what has happened, both of which may be good for our survival. But the price we pay for this safety is quite literally the loss of the moment, where reality is unfolding, and the moment is a place most adults will avoid at all costs. That constant thinking dulls your perception to keep your body alive in many respects, and you can see the same dynamic at work on smaller levels as well. In Season 1, we talked about how magical relationships often seem at the very beginning. It seems like anything is possible, and then our mind immediately goes to work to putting that person in a neat and tidy framework of context. You can see the same thing happen when you buy something new, or move to a new place, or even just go on vacation. The beach that seemed magical on day one seems to have lost a bit of something a week later. This helps explain why when people enter a lucid dream state or astral projection, or even have a near-death experience, or even go under the influence of an intense psychoactive, they'll often say something like, "Somehow I was more awake than I am during the day," because you enter a space that is far more free from context. But your mind has a real motivation to keep you from living in the present moment. Go ahead and try my meditation techniques in spaced out or a guided meditation. See how you do. Watch all the tricky ways your mind will fight to remain focused on memories and theories, anything to avoid the present moment. Now again, our brain's very job is to keep us alive. Some neurologists and evolutionary biologists would say that the main reason that we're the dominant species is because of our very ability to analyze the past, find patterns, and then look for those patterns in the world. We're constantly trying to predict and adapt. We're pattern-seeking animals because it's simply the best way to keep a body alive. In a way, you are built to overthink the confusing events from your past so that you can make better decisions down the road, decisions that will keep you alive. It's why meditation often seems impossible. Our internal dialogue is a wonderful, amazing system to keep an organism alive and moving forward and thriving, but it's a terrible one to keep an organism mentally and emotionally healthy. Our brains are like an amazing piece of technology that we threw out the instruction booklet to. You could say there are two main pieces of information we missed when we were given our brains. Number one, we are not our internal dialogue. We are the consciousness which observes that running dialogue, which means it's possible to let the brain do what it's doing without being personally identified with all its noise and processing. And that changes everything. And number two is, if you can make peace with number one, you can face this ultimate terrifying reality, which is there will always remain one event you can never avoid, one variable which you can never escape, no matter how much thinking, analyzing, predicting your brain manages. It doesn't matter how smart you make yourself or how healthy, how physically strong. It doesn't matter how much money you accumulate in this life. Your body, along with that brain, is eventually going to die. So in the end, all of this context building, all the thinking and anxiety, the planning and predicting will fail. Death is ultimately unavoidable. And I hate to tell you, nature doesn't really care. Death is necessary for the larger cycle of life. Nature is indifferent to our response to death. For the most part, from the larger perspective of evolution, we're built so that we live long enough to pass on our DNA. I'm guessing it's about this point in the show where some of you are going, "Wow, thanks a lot, Ian. You are really cheering up my day. That's great." But if you notice, I've been relaying this information with a general smile on my face. If I seem aloof about all of this, all I can tell you is that I promise you my attitude is genuine. I'm not sadistic, and I don't actually want to die. It's not like I have a death wish all of a sudden, or that I won't still do everything in my power to keep myself alive. Perhaps the best way to explain it is that I no longer suffer from the prospect of my death any longer. My experiences with consciousness have left me 100% convinced that what I am, what we all truly are, is more akin to a base quality of the universe, which is infinite. It had no beginning, it has no end. Our core experience of perception, of being aware, is a quality which is somehow fundamental to the cosmos. I would argue, as would many of the Buddhist traditions, that literally everything else in the universe, all matter and energy that comes and goes, lives and dies, occurs within this substrate we call consciousness. And since those realizations, my life has begun taking on that magic I felt I lost back in childhood. I now live more of my life in the present moment. But wait, I said earlier that all that thinking is actually for our safety. So am I now less safe? Your mind might try to tell you that, but no, because I've learned that both are possible. Your brain can continue planning and negotiating the future without you being identified with all that noise. The identification is the problem in the end. And I get it. I know that I probably sound disconnected or probably a bit insane to some of you, hearing that I really am not worried about death. When I was younger and I would hear someone talk like this, I assumed they were delusional, or it was some kind of an act, or they were just trying to look tough. And don't get me wrong, maybe some of them were. What I could not accept was the possibility that someone could be genuinely sane and emotionally centered and also not be terrified of the truth I just laid out about death and how our mind is ultimately going to fail in its quest to keep us alive, no matter what. How many disaster movies have I watched where the stodgy old man is just going like, hey, I've lived a good life, I'm tired of running, and I'd just slow you kids down, so you go ahead without me and save yourselves, and I'll just wait for the storm to take me. That seemed like an impossible state to achieve, and possibly delusional. The change I personally experienced with my attitude towards death did not happen all at once, say after one major experience. And I know that's not the case for everyone. There are people who, after one near-death experience, have attested to no longer having any fear of death. That's at least not how it worked for me, but then again, I'm kind of a hard-headed skeptic. It didn't even happen after my first out-of-body experience. This change for me was gradual, and it took place over a period of time. It took hundreds of direct experiences with non-localized consciousness for me. So I want to make something abundantly clear. I am not suggesting that you shouldn't grieve the loss of a loved one. I'm not suggesting there isn't incredible heartbreak when someone who's been an important part of your life passes away. You need to honor and you need to face all the thoughts and deep emotions that come with a loved one's death. What I am saying is that if you continue to follow this path that I've been pointing to on this series and in my books, you're going to realize that the mainstream accepted narratives that have been sold to you about how awful and frightening death actually is are not accurate. That is going to make your life better. If I could keep only one insight, and I had to give up all of my knowledge about lucid dreaming, all of my experiences with being out of the body and with healing, I would maintain my relationship I carry now with my own death, which is based on my deeper knowledge of what I am, what we all are. And that is what really changed my life at the core. Again, I can't say what your personal individual experience is going to be like for you. In the end, dying may unfold for you in a way that is unique to the ultimate unraveling of your ego. But one way to summarize the perspective you'll merge with is to say that ultimately you're going to realize that your death is not different from the death of your favorite character in a book or a movie. Is it sad when your favorite hero dies? Sure it is, but you get over it with some distance when you come back to your full sanity of, oh, that's right, that was just one possible storyline that I got temporarily caught up with. And you're going to understand that your consciousness has had this same bizarre relationship with many other things in your world besides just your physical body. A relationship that is terribly confusing and yet so incredibly powerful, and we take it for granted all the time. And we call that relationship identification. We are beings that are able to identify with something, even when deep down we know it isn't really us. We don't just do this with characters and stories, mind you. We did this with our toys growing up, and even some of our belongings as adults. Have you ever backed your car into something and you almost feel real physical pain from your bumper denting? You're going to realize you've been making the same mistake of misidentification with your own physical body. And I know that some of you in the know are aware that the book Migration that this series is based on actually dives into those areas with a lot more detail, a lot more depth. So again, go check that out if you want a fuller understanding of this perspective. But I've said it before and I'll say it again, the experience of reality outside of the bounds of the ego is blissful. And since consciousness never was really born and it never will die, it doesn't come and go because it embodies all of time and space. It's not until you step out of that highly narrow, limited viewpoint of the ego and physical body that you'll return to your natural state of a limitless awareness, one that has always been shared by every sentient being that's ever existed. If you can appreciate that, you can understand why so many who have had near-death experiences will speak of this sense of returning to their true home. That's a good way to describe this unlimited awareness we flow back into, or more precisely, we realize the limits we experienced on that awareness have always just been illusions. You should be able to appreciate why so many people speak of reconnecting with their ancestors or loved ones who have passed, and everyone is greeting them with open arms. Again, however it specifically plays out for you, we're talking about a return to your most natural, blissful state of existence, one that you will deeply recognize. It's not a foreign place at all. In fact, if you're anything like me, you're going to ask yourself, why did I ever leave here? Every time I tap back into pure awareness after being caught up with the world and responsibilities and rent and taxes, I'm always like, why do I ever leave? And then there's this sense of, well, because I still have work to do. But in that state, you'll have access to the awareness that has been living behind the eyes of everything that does, will, and has ever lived. And none of this is anything that you can take on faith. I personally have no use for faith. Faith is just what you want to believe without having any evidence for it. These words of mine may be nice to hear, but I'm not interested in placating you. You need direct experience for this to be real for you, not just philosophy and lofty ideas. If you're ever going, well, I just trust what that guy says on that show of his, you've missed my intention for you. You need to meditate and do the work to start waking up consciously in your dreams. I've now described several different techniques for all of this on this series. Now, as with all of these topics that we cover in this series, there is absolutely no way to cover every last detail, but those are the major points I hope to impart to you on the topic of death. But if there is some major aspect that I missed, please reach out to me, ask your questions in the comments below, and I do look at them. I go through everything that anyone said to me, or if you want to contact me through any of my social media channels, I will be honest. I'll tell you what I know, and if it's something that I don't understand, I'll be honest about that too, and tell you this is just not a topic that I have any personal experience with. So again, please like and subscribe. That really does help me grow this channel. I really do appreciate it. So in the meantime, until we meet again, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye. What I could not accept was that someone could be truly, genuinely insane. That's not what I was trying to say. I'm not even high. I've got no excuse.